Krishna led Arjuna away from the palace and toward the old temple road, where the stones were carved with marks from earlier ages. Along the way, more of the truth came into view, and the threat grew larger with every step. The eclipse was not only darkening the sky above one kingdom, it was spreading a wound through all the upper realms, and the shadow-forged beings were using that wound like a gate. Their master was not yet seen, but his purpose was plain. He believed order was weak, duty was a cage, and the world should be reshaped by fear so that only power would remain. That belief made him dangerous because he did not strike from rage alone. He struck from conviction, which meant he would not stop easily. Arjuna listened, but his doubt grew as well. He had trained for battle, he had won contests, and he had never backed down from a challenge, yet this was different. This fight could not be won by muscle or speed. It demanded faith, patience, and a mind that would not fracture under pressure. At the temple road, an old guardian named Raghav stepped from the shadows. Raghav was a man with gray hair, a broad frame, and a face lined by years of duty. He guarded the sealed stairway that led into the sky vault, and he cared only that the right warrior reached it before the wrong hands did. He warned them that 3 legendary warriors had already turned against the light, each one tempted by the eclipse in a different way. One sought honor, one sought revenge, and one sought freedom from all vows. Their names were known across the realms, and their power could crush a lesser hero without effort. Arjuna felt the weight of those names at once, because every step ahead would test something deeper than his body. Krishna placed a hand near Arjuna's shoulder and said that courage did not mean the absence of fear. It meant moving while fear still shouted. That simple truth did not erase Arjuna's doubt, but it gave him a line to hold onto as they climbed. Above them, the sky had become a cracked mirror of black and silver. The first shadow host marched across that broken light, and their footsteps shook the temple bells. Arjuna reached for his own blade, but Krishna stopped him and pointed upward. The astral bow would not answer a hand that only wanted victory. It would answer a heart that understood why victory mattered. With that, the pair entered the stairway, and the journey into the upper battlefields began. The stairway rose through the temple like a long scar of stone, narrow and steep, and each step carried cold air from the broken sky above. Arjuna climbed first, with his dark hair tied back and his red sash fluttering behind him, while Krishna followed in calm blue and gold robes, his black hair barely moving as a soft glow surrounded him. Behind them, the lower halls rumbled with the march of the shadow host, those armored beings with black smoke bodies, jagged metal plates, and red eyes that burned like warned embers. The danger was clear now, and it was not just that they were outnumbered. If the shadow army reached the temple heart, the shattered sky gate would open wider, and the darkness above would spill into every land below. Arjuna knew that if that happened, no village, no road, and no small safe place would remain untouched. That fear sat in his chest like a stone, and Krishna felt it without needing words. He had come to stop a war that began long before this night, because someone had chosen fear as a tool and made a kingdom from it. That someone was Victor, a hard-eyed ruler who had once trusted nothing and no one, and who now wanted the temple gate because he believed only shadows could protect power from betrayal. He had fed on panic, built his army from it, and sent his shadow-forged servants to crack the sky from below. As they climbed, the stairway changed. The stone walls grew taller, then thinner, and old carvings appeared in the dark, showing bows, stars, and kings kneeling before a bright circle of light. Arjuna stared at the carvings while he breathed hard, because he had spent years winning with force, speed, and skill, and now none of that felt enough. He was a man of strong build and focused brown eyes, trained to strike first and stand firm, but the silence of the astral bow had shaken him more than any enemy blade. He had touched the bow once before, and it had answered only a little, like a distant star waking from sleep. Krishna had said it clearly then, and he said it again now, in a voice that stayed gentle even while the world trembled around them. The bow would not answer hunger for pride, it would answer a heart that understood why others had to be protected. Arjuna wanted to believe that, but doubt still followed him. He feared that his strength came from talent alone, and that when true darkness arrived, his hands would fail him. Krishna walked beside him like a steady lamp in deep water, and he explained more as they climbed. Long ago, the astral bow was shaped to obey a wielder who could see beyond victory. It was never made for a person who wanted to stand above others. It was made for someone who could stand with them. That was why Victor could never use it, no matter how much power he stole. His heart always reached for control, not care. The first attack came before Arjuna could answer. A shadow-forged warrior sprang from a side archway, its broken spear scraping sparks from the stone as its red eyes fixed on Arjuna. Then another came from above, then two more from below, moving in stiff and unnatural ways like puppets pulled by hidden strings. Krishna lifted one hand, and a band of blue light spread across the stairway, slowing their charge just enough for Arjuna to move. Arjuna drew his blade and met the first one in a sharp clash, turning the spear aside and driving the creature back against a wall. The second slammed into the stone step behind him, while the third lunged at Krishna with jerking speed. Krishna did not strike with anger. He simply stepped aside, and his glowing aura pushed the creature off balance, sending it stumbling into the others. The stairway shook with each impact, and dust fell from the ceiling in thin gray curtains. Arjuna fought with skill, but each swing also forced him to notice the strange thing about the shadow host. They did not fight like living soldiers. They fought like fear given shape. Every move was direct, cold, and empty, as if they were made to press weakness until something broke. Krishna saw Arjuna watching, and he used that moment to speak between the clashes. Victor had learned that fear makes people obey faster than force, he said. So he built servants that looked like warriors but only carried the feelings he wanted to spread. Arjuna tightened his grip and forced himself not to think of retreat. He could feel the bow call faintly from deeper above, like a quiet star buried in storm clouds. They reached a wide landing where the stairway opened into a broken hall with no roof, only the cracked mirror sky above. Black and silver light spilled over the stone floor, and in that strange glow Arjuna saw the upper battlefield for the first time. Great platforms floated at uneven heights beyond the hall, linked by narrow bridges and torn banners, while more shadow-forged beings moved across them in scattered lines. Far away, a bell tower leaned at an impossible angle, and each deep toll sent a wave through the air. Then Arjuna noticed something else, and it changed the meaning of everything. The shadows were not just marching upward. They were circling one place in the center of the battlefield, where a dark circle pulsed like a wound. Inside that circle stood a young woman named Maya, a temple keeper with dark brown hair and a torn white robe, her hands raised as she tried to hold the seal together with trembling courage. She had stayed behind to protect the gate because she knew the temple would collapse if the seal failed. Beside her crouched Ben, a broad-shouldered guard with short blonde hair, a cracked shield, and a face full of strain, trying to hold the line while his body shook from exhaustion. They were not soldiers by choice. They were the last protectors of a place that still mattered, because the upper battlefield was not only a war zone, it was a lock, and the lock was breaking. Arjuna wanted to rush forward at once, but Krishna caught his arm and stopped him with a look that was calm and urgent at the same time. He pointed not at the enemy, but at Maya and Ben. The real task was not to cut down the nearest threat. The real task was to protect the seal long enough for the astral bow to wake fully. Arjuna understood then that his anger had been making the battle smaller. He had been seeing enemies, but not the people trapped behind them. That was the turning point, and it came with a truth that struck harder than any blade. Victor had not only invaded the temple to seize power, he had once been one of the seal keepers himself, and he knew exactly where the weak point was. He had been betrayed years ago by men he trusted, and that pain had twisted into a simple belief. If he could not trust the world, then he would rule a world that could not hurt him first. So he opened the ancient gate with fear, fed it through the shadow host, and used the broken temple to force everyone else into obedience. Krishna spoke this truth aloud so Arjuna could hear it clearly, because understanding the enemy did not mean agreeing with him, but it did mean knowing how to stop him. Arjuna looked again at the battlefield, and this time he saw not just monsters, but fear spreading through the ranks like smoke. He saw Maya hold the seal with shaking hands, Ben brace his shield, and the sky itself split wider over their heads. Then he made the choice that changed his heart. He would not fight to prove he was strong. He would fight so others could stand without fear. He stepped forward, lowered his shoulders, and called for the astral bow with that thought in mind. The silver light above him answered in a bright line, then curved into the shape of the ancient bow, its star carvings glowing as if awake for the first time. Krishna smiled, because the answer had come not to a hungry warrior, but to a protector. And just as the bow fully formed in Arjuna's hands, Victor's voice echoed from the upper dark, cold and certain, promising that this was only the beginning of the true war. Arjuna raised the bow, Krishna lifted his glowing hand beside him, and the shadow host surged forward as the battle for the upper battlefield entered its next, far more dangerous stage. The upper battlefield sat high inside the broken temple, where cold wind slipped through cracked stone and made every shadow look alive. Black smoke still clung to the pillars, and the floor was marked with glowing tar carvings that now pulsed like a waking heart. Arjuna stood at the center of that strange light, his dark hair pushed back by the wind, his strong body tense, and his brown eyes fixed on the dark space above. The astral bow shone in his hands with bright silver light, its star carvings and blue lines alive with a soft power that felt both ancient and new. Beside him, Krishna stood in calm blue and gold robes, his black hair neat, his face peaceful, and his glow soft enough to steady the whole ruined hall. Below them, Maya and Ben were still trapped in the lower wreckage, where fear and dust had already worn them down. That was why this battle mattered so much. If the upper level fell, the lower survivors would be left open, and Victor would reach the hidden power at the heart of the temple. Victor wanted that power because it would let him command the shadow forces without limit, and he believed control was the only way to stop the world from hurting him first. The first wave of shadow-forged beings rushed forward like broken dolls pulled by a cruel hand. They were armored humanoid creatures with black smoke bodies, jagged metal plates, glowing red eyes, and spear-like weapons that seemed torn from a forge made in a nightmare. They moved in stiff, unnatural steps, but there were many of them, and their weight made the stone floor shake. Arjuna lifted the bow, but his arms did not move at once. He had won the weapon, yet he had not fully trusted himself with it. Krishna saw that hesitation at once because he always saw the heart before the hand. "Do not fire like a hunter," Krishna said in a low voice, as if speaking to a friend beside a quiet river. "Fire like a shield." Arjuna took one breath, then another, and his shoulders slowly settled. The bow answered that change with a brighter glow, and one silver arrow formed from light. Arjuna released it, and the arrow split the front line of shadows cleanly, driving them back in a burst of blue sparks. The others faltered, and for one precious moment, the hall grew still. Arjuna looked surprised, but Krishna only smiled. The bow had not chosen the strongest man in the room. It had chosen the man willing to stand between danger and the people behind him. Then Victor's voice rolled down from the dark upper archway, cold and sharp, and every surviving shadow turned toward the sound. Victor stepped into view wearing dark layered armor with a high collar, a torn black cape, and silver marks across his chest that seemed to hold some ugly promise of power. His black hair was pushed back from his severe face, and his hard eyes held no doubt at all. He had the posture of a man who believed fear was the same thing as respect. "You finally touched it," he said, and his voice carried through the chamber like metal dragged over stone. "Good, now I know the seal is cracking." Krishna's calm face did not change, but his glowing hand lifted slightly, as if he were reading a map no one else could see. Arjuna felt the truth in those words before he understood them fully. The carvings under his feet were not just decorations, they were locks. Long ago, protectors had placed them there to keep the upper chamber sealed, because the power above could be used to guard the temple or destroy everyone in it. Victor had learned that truth, and he had spent years hunting a way to force the seal open. He had not come simply to win a battle. He had come to claim a gate that only a protector could awaken. That made him more dangerous because his pride was tied to fear, and fear made him desperate. The shadow host surged again, and this time Victor moved with them, not behind them but through them, as if he trusted their smoke and steel to cover his advance. Arjuna fired a second and then a third arrow, each one striking with clean silver force and breaking the front ranks apart. Krishna moved beside him with quiet, measured steps, and when a shadow blade slipped through the darkness, Krishna lifted one glowing hand and pushed the attack aside with a soft wave of light. No violence came from him, yet every motion carried certainty. He was not there to win glory, he was there to keep Arjuna centered. That mattered because the bow responded to purpose, not anger. Arjuna noticed this as he watched the shadows reform. Every time he grew tense and tried to force the battle, the bow dimmed a little. Every time he thought of Maya, of Ben, and of the people trapped below, the bow burned brighter. Victor saw that too, and his mouth tightened with disgust. "He fights like a servant," Victor said. "A real warrior takes power for himself." Arjuna almost answered with anger, but Krishna spoke first. "Power taken for the self becomes a chain," he said. "Power used for others becomes a bridge." Those words did not sound loud, but they landed deep inside Arjuna. He understood then that the real battle was not only against the shadows. It was against the part of himself that still wanted to prove he was enough on his own. Victor raised one hand, and the silver marks on his chest flashed cold. The shadows around him thickened, and the upper hall began to shake as if something huge had stirred beneath the stone. A hidden door behind the far pillars groaned and split open, revealing a narrow stairway climbing into darker space. Victor smiled for the first time, and it was a terrible thing because it carried no warmth at all. "The seal is open," he said. "Now the real chamber wakes." Arjuna felt the air change, and so did Krishna. The peaceful man's eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in understanding. He had known there was a second layer to this battle, and now that layer was pulling itself forward. Ben's battered voice suddenly crackled up from below through the broken floor, calling Arjuna's name with tired urgency. Maya followed, her worried voice sharp and brave at once, telling them the lower passage was filling with moving shadow. That warning made the danger feel close and real. If Victor reached the chamber above, the shadows below would grow stronger, and the trapped survivors would be swallowed in the spreading dark. Arjuna looked toward the stair, then back at the bow in his hands. For the first time, his doubt did not make him freeze. It sharpened him. He understood that being chosen did not mean being perfect. It meant standing up again even while afraid. He drew the bowstring, and the light gathered so strongly that even Victor took one small step back. But Victor was not finished. He lifted his dark hand toward the open stair and spoke a final command that sent the remaining shadow-forged beings racing upward, not to attack Arjuna, but to guard the path to whatever waited above. The battle had changed shape. Now the heroes had to survive the hall, defend the seal, and decide whether to follow Victor into the deeper chamber before it was too late. Arjuna held his aim, Krishna stayed beside him, and together they faced the staircase that had just become the center of a much larger war. At the same time, far below, Maya and Ben were still fighting to keep the lower ruins from collapsing inward. Maya, the woman with dark brown hair, worried eyes, and a torn white temple robe, braced one hand against a cracked wall while dust covered her sleeves. Ben, the broad man with short blonde hair and a battered guard uniform, leaned on his cracked shield and tried to keep the weakest passage clear. They were not strong enough to win the whole war, and they both knew it, but they had one job that mattered just as much as Arjuna's. They had to hold the people below until help could reach them. Ben looked up through the broken opening and saw the silver light above, and for a moment he smiled through his exhaustion because he knew Arjuna had finally found his way. Maya, still breathing hard, whispered that the temple itself was changing. The carvings were spreading, the shadows were learning, and the old seal was not just a lock but a test. That was the final truth of this part, and it changed everything. This was not a random attack. It was a trial built long ago to find the one person willing to protect others instead of ruling them. Arjuna had passed that first test, but Victor had now forced the deeper chamber open, and whatever waited there would not allow hesitation. With the bow glowing, Krishna calm at his side, and the dark stair opening ahead, the next choice was already closing in. The broken temple chamber felt colder now, as if the mountain itself had begun to breathe through the cracks in the stone. Dust drifted through silver light, and the shattered pillars cast long shadows across the floor. Below the open stair, the air moved in slow waves, and every sound seemed to return twice. Arjuna stood at the edge with the glowing astral bow in his hands, his dark hair damp with sweat, his brown eyes sharp but uncertain. Krishna stood just behind him, calm in his blue and gold robes, his black hair still and neat, his peaceful face unchanged even as danger gathered around them. Maya, a woman with dark brown hair, worried eyes, and a torn white temple robe with gold trim, leaned against one of the broken pillars while she tried to catch her breath. Ben, a broad man with short blonde hair and a battered guard uniform, kept his cracked shield raised and watched the dark stair with tired loyalty. Victor stood apart from them all, a man with black hair, hard eyes, and cold pride, his torn black cape hanging from dark armor marked with silver lines. He wanted control, and that desire had dragged everyone here. He had forced the deeper chamber open because he believed power belonged to the strongest hand, and he could not stand the thought of a man like Arjuna being chosen instead. That was the danger now. If Victor seized what waited below, the temple would awaken in the wrong hands, and every path behind them would close forever. The first seal had already proven that the temple was not a prison alone. It was a test. The second chamber would decide something deeper, and no one knew yet what would be lost if the answer was wrong. Victor took the first step toward the stair, and the floor answered with a low groan. "We are not standing here to be judged by dead stone," he said, his voice tight and sharp. "Whatever is below will belong to the one strong enough to claim it." Arjuna turned toward him, the bow's silver light reflecting in his focused eyes. He did not answer with anger because he had seen enough pain to know that anger only fed fear. Instead, he asked the question that mattered. If you only want to claim it, why did the temple reject your hand? Victor's jaw tightened, and for one brief moment his pride slipped enough to show the fear underneath. He was not just greedy, he was afraid of being left behind, afraid of being weak, afraid that others would be chosen while he remained nothing but a man who had fought too hard for too long. That fear had twisted into control. He had once been a guard captain who believed order was the same thing as safety, and when the mountain temple rumors spread through the land, he came here convinced that an ancient weapon or power could let him keep everyone in line forever. But the seal did not answer to force, and that fact enraged him. Before he could move again, the dark stair began to pulse, and the carvings in the floor lit up like slow fire under stone. From the walls around the chamber, black smoke leaked through broken seams, and the shadow-forged beings returned in silence. Their armored bodies were stiff and unnatural, their jagged metal plates catching the light, their red eyes burning like embers in a furnace. One stepped out first, then three more, then a full cluster of them spread across the chamber like a waking army. Behind them, the larger shadow host gathered in a shifting mass, each figure carrying a broken spear-like weapon and moving as if some unseen hand was pulling invisible strings. Maya swallowed hard and clutched the edge of her robe. Ben lifted his cracked shield and moved closer to her without a word. Krishna finally spoke, his tone gentle, clear, and steady. "This place is not asking who can take," he said. "It is asking who can protect." The words hung in the air, and Arjuna felt them strike deeper than any blade could. He understood then that the temple's trial had a purpose. It was built long ago by people who feared rulers more than they feared emptiness. They must have hidden something sacred here, and they must have known that the wrong kind of man would turn it into a weapon. Victor heard the same truth, but he refused it. He drew himself taller, wrapped his hand around the hilt at his side, and started forward anyway. The first shadow-forged being lunged, and the chamber erupted into motion. Arjuna raised the astral bow, and the light bent around his hands like it had been waiting for him all along. A silver arrow formed from pure brilliance, bright enough to cut through the shadows without harming the stone. He released it, and it struck the creature's chest plate with a ringing flash, forcing it backward in a burst of smoke and scattered metal. Two more came at him at once, and he stepped aside, his battle cloak swinging behind him as he shifted with clean, practiced speed. The bow answered each movement, brightening when his body and spirit stayed calm together. Krishna did not attack with rage or fear. He lifted one hand, and a soft wave of blue light spread outward, steadying Arjuna's breathing and slowing the advance of the nearest shadows. The light did not destroy the creatures by force alone. It made their movements break apart as if their dark control could not survive inside peace. Maya saw the opening and pulled a fallen stone rod free from the floor. Though she was shaken, she was not helpless. She struck the ankle of a shadow soldier and forced it to stumble, giving Ben time to drive his shield forward and shove another one away from the group. Ben was not a flashy fighter, but he was loyal and stubborn, and those things mattered more than style. He planted his boots and protected Maya with every bit of strength he had left. Victor, however, did the opposite of protect. He slammed into the nearest shadow with raw force, and the clash sent sparks through the dark air. He knocked one creature aside, then another, but every move he made was loud, harsh, and hungry. He did not help the others unless it also proved his strength. The chamber noticed. The carvings on the floor flared brighter, and the shadows answered by becoming sharper, faster, and more aggressive. Victor had awakened the deeper defense of the temple, and now his own need for control was feeding the danger he claimed to hate. Arjuna saw it happen, and for a moment he considered letting Victor face the result alone. That thought passed through him like a cold wind, but it did not stay. He remembered the first seal. He remembered the hidden test. He remembered that power without care would ruin everything. So he changed his position, stepped between Victor and the rest of the group, and started protecting even the man who had caused the chaos. That choice changed the chamber. The astral bow flashed brighter, and a clear ringing note spread through the stone like a bell heard in a dream. The shadow soldiers hesitated. Their red eyes flickered. Their movements, once stiff and certain, began to break apart. Arjuna realized then that the bow was not simply reacting to skill. It was responding to intent. It was not enough to strike well. The chosen wielder had to defend others first, even when one of those others was an enemy in the moment. Victor saw Arjuna place himself in danger for his sake, and the sight shook him more than the shadows did. "Why?" Victor demanded, his voice rough with disbelief. "Why protect me after everything I have done?" Arjuna kept moving, driving one shadow back and then another, and he answered without looking away from the fight. "Because this is bigger than you." Those words landed harder than any blow. Victor's expression tightened, and his pride cracked just enough for the truth to slip through. He had spent so long thinking that strength meant standing above others that he had forgotten how to stand with them. He had not come here only to win. He had come here because he was terrified that if he did not seize power first, he would be crushed by the world forever. That fear had blinded him to the fact that the temple was never built for rulers. It was built for guardians. As the realization spread, the larger shadow host surged down from the far side of the chamber, and the room filled with the sound of metal scraping stone. Krishna's aura widened, calm and bright, and he spoke one line that seemed to settle the air itself. "The trial is waking." At the same instant, the dark stair below them opened wider, and a deeper light came from below, not warm, not cold, but ancient and patient. On the lowest step sat a sealed pedestal, and on that pedestal rested a shape wrapped in black chains of light. No one could see it clearly yet, but everyone felt its pull. Maya stared at it with wide eyes. Ben tightened his grip. Victor took one step forward and stopped. Arjuna felt the astral bow pulse in his hands as if it recognized the object below. Then the floor beneath the group shuddered hard enough to throw dust from the ceiling, and a wall of shadow rose between the stair and the chamber entrance. The temple had changed the rules again. It was not finished testing them, and whatever waited under that black chain of light was now close enough to change all of their lives if only they could reach it before the shadows closed in once more. The broken temple chamber felt colder than before, and the air moved like a slow warning. Dust drifted through silver light, and the cracked stone floor glowed with thin lines of tar-colored symbols. Arjuna stood on the upper battlefield level with the astral bow in both hands, his dark hair falling over a tense face, his strong body braced for another attack. Beside him, Krishna kept a calm stance in blue and gold robes, his black hair still and neat, his peaceful eyes watching the shadows with careful patience. Maya, a woman with dark brown hair and worried eyes, clutched her torn white temple robe and tried to stay steady. Ben, a broad man with short blonde hair, lifted his cracked shield and shifted his weight on tired legs. All of them understood the same terrible truth now. If they could not reach the sealed object below the stair, the temple would keep splitting them apart until the shadows won the entire chamber. The black wall between the stair and the entrance did not move like stone or smoke. It moved like a living rule, made to block anyone who tried to rush the pedestal below. On the far side of that barrier, the shadow host gathered in a broken line, their armored shapes stiff and unnatural, their red eyes bright in the dark. In front of them stood Victor, a man with black hair, hard eyes, and cold pride, wearing dark layered armor and a torn black cape. Silver marks crossed his chest like old scars made by some vow he never forgave. Victor wanted power because he feared weakness more than anything else. He believed the temple held a force that could make him untouchable, and that fear had made him cruel, impatient, and sharp in every word he spoke. He stepped closer to the black wall, saw Arjuna across the chamber, and smiled as if this was the moment he had been waiting for. Krishna spoke first, and his voice stayed quiet, which made it cut through the chamber even more clearly. He told Arjuna that the temple was not just defending the seal, it was testing the people who came for it. The temple wanted to know who would use power, who would protect it, and who would break under fear. Arjuna felt the astral bow pulse again, and the silver light along its curved frame brightened in answer. The bow was not just a weapon. It was a living, sacred thing, ancient and aware, and it was reacting to the object hidden under the black chain of light because the two were connected. Arjuna did not yet know how, but the bow had chosen this path for a reason. Maya looked at the stair below and said the same thing she had feared from the start. If Victor reached the seal first, he would force the temple open and unleash something none of them could control. Ben tightened his grip on the shield and said he would hold the line long enough for someone to move. That simple promise mattered because everyone in the chamber was tired, wounded, and running out of time. Then the floor shuddered again, hard enough to knock loose fresh dust from the ceiling. The shadow wall behind them twisted, and the black barrier in front of the stair began to thin at the center. The temple had changed the rules once more. It wanted action, not waiting. Arjuna saw the chance and moved first. He stepped forward, raised the astral bow, and drew back a string made of bright silver light. The bow answered with a clean glowing line, and a sharp beam formed between his hands. The first shadow-forged beings charged from the far side, their broken spear-like weapons lifted in stiff, jerking motions. Ben met them with his shield, taking the impact and forcing one creature back with sheer force. Maya rushed in beside him, using her protective wraps to steady herself while she grabbed a fallen stone rod and struck at a creature's arm. Krishna did not attack with anger. He lifted one hand, and a soft gold light spread across the floor, enough to weaken the shadows and make their movements slow and clumsy. Arjuna released the arrow of light, and it shattered the front rank of the enemy line, driving them back toward the broken pillars. The chamber did not fall silent. It only opened another path of danger. Victor saw the opening and used it at once. He did not charge blindly. He moved with cold control, stepping around his own shadow host as if they were tools, not allies. That was the truth of him. He had always cared more for winning than for the lives around him, and the temple only made that selfishness easier to see. He shouted across the chamber that Arjuna was wasting the bow on fear and restraint, while Victor would use the seal to make sure no one could ever threaten him again. He believed that was strength. Arjuna heard the same words and felt something deeper than anger. He understood that Victor was not just greedy. He was terrified of being powerless, of being trapped beneath someone stronger, of being ignored when the world turned violent. That fear had hardened into pride, and pride had made him dangerous. Victor raised one hand, and a dark pulse burst from his armor, shaking the floor and forcing Maya to stumble. Ben caught her before she fell. The impact did not break them, but it reminded them how little room they had left. Krishna then revealed a truth that changed the shape of the moment. The seal below the stairs was not only a prison, it was also a memory. Long ago, the temple's builders had hidden something here because the outside world had become hungry for it. They bound it with the black chain of light so it would wait for a guardian, not a thief. Krishna said the temple recognized Arjuna because the astral bow was made to answer that same kind of guardian. The bow would open the seal only for someone who carried courage without greed. Arjuna stared at the stair, then at his own hands, and for the first time since this journey began, he understood that the temple was judging his heart as much as his skill. That was the twist hidden in the chamber. The treasure below was never meant to reward the strongest person. It was meant to reveal the one who could bear the cost of knowing the truth. Arjuna moved toward the stair while the others covered him, and every step felt like it passed through a different world. The shadow wall behind him kept thinning and thickening, trying to confuse his direction, while the ceiling above cracked with low groans. One shadow-forged being broke through Ben's guard and rushed the stair, but Ben slammed it aside with his shield and held firm with a tired shout. Maya slipped close to Arjuna's side for a moment and told him not to look at Victor, because Victor wanted to pull him into anger. Arjuna nodded once. He had fought enough to know that simple advice could be stronger than a blade. Krishna stayed near the center of the chamber, his calm light spreading just enough to keep the shadows from swallowing the path. Together they created a narrow line through the chaos, and Arjuna reached the edge of the dark stair. Below, the lower chamber opened like a hidden mouth, and the deep chamber pedestal stood in the darkness. It was old stone, cracked and worn, ringed by faint glowing carvings that looked half asleep. At the top of the pedestal rested the sealed object, wrapped tightly in the black chain of light. The chain did not move, but it felt alive, like it was listening. Arjuna raised the astral bow, and the silver glow grew stronger until it lit the stair in pale blue-white light. He could feel the bow and the seal pull toward each other, like two parts of one broken promise. Behind him, Victor shouted for him to stop wasting time and hand it over. The shadow host surged again, and the chamber shook so hard that a pillar split and collapsed near the wall. Dust burst into the air in a thick cloud, and for a moment everything became hard to see. In that blur, Arjuna understood that Victor was close enough to make one desperate move, and the temple was waiting to see who would reach the pedestal first. Arjuna planted his feet, drew the bowstring back until the light sang, and aimed down into the dark. The black chain of light around the object below began to tremble for the first time. Krishna's voice came from behind him, calm and sure, telling him that the seal would answer truth, not force. Ben kept the shadows busy at the upper landing, and Maya called out that Victor was moving again. Arjuna felt the temple breathe around him as if the entire mountain had become one living judge. Then the sealed object gave off a faint pulse from under the chain, and the astral bow answered with a brighter one. Whatever was hidden below was waking, and whatever it was, it knew Arjuna had finally arrived. The stairway shook once more, the shadows pressed in from both sides, and the next choice came so fast that no one in the chamber could afford to hesitate. The chamber held its breath as the stairway trembled, and cold dust drifted through the broken light. Arjuna stood near the lower steps with his feet planted hard, his dark hair falling across one eye, his strong arms tense beneath his armor, and his brown eyes locked on the sealed pedestal below. The upper battlefield temple was a ruined place of cracked stone, shattered pillars, and glowing tar lines that looked like old warnings written into the floor. Maya, the woman with dark brown hair and worried eyes, pressed herself against a fallen column, still clutching her torn white robe with gold trim. Ben, the tired guard with short blonde hair and a battered shield, stood between her and the moving shadows, even though his knees wanted to give way. Above them all, Victor watched from the broken landing with black hair, hard eyes, and a cold face that never softened. He wanted the sealed power for himself, not because he loved strength for its own sake, but because fear had ruled his life for so long that he believed control was the only thing that could keep him safe. The thing under the chain pulsed again, and the astral bow in Arjuna's hands flared with silver light. Everyone in the chamber understood the same terrible truth at once. Something ancient was waking, Victor was moving to claim it, and if he reached it first, the mountain temple would become a prison for everyone who had entered it. Arjuna did not rush forward, even though every part of him wanted to. He had learned, through pain and loss and long days of doubt, that courage was not the same as speed. His focused eyes flicked from the pedestal to Victor, then to the dark stair behind him where the shadow host had begun to gather again. The armored creatures moved in stiff, broken motions, their black smoke bodies sliding around jagged metal plates, their red eyes burning like coals in a forge. Their broken spear-like weapons scraped the stone as they advanced in a slow ring, as if they had no will of their own and were only obeying a command buried deeper inside the mountain. Krishna stood in the center of the chamber with calm eyes and blue and gold robes, his soft glow cutting through the dark like a steady lamp. He had no fear in his face, but he carried a heavy concern because he knew more about the temple than he had said so far. He told Arjuna in a voice that stayed gentle even as the chamber shook, that the seal below was built to protect a sacred truth, not a simple weapon. Long ago, men like Victor had tried to bend spiritual power into a tool of rule, and the temple had answered by hiding the astral bow's deeper bond inside the mountain itself. The bow did not belong to force, it belonged to balance. That was why it brightened now, and that was why the hidden seal was stirring. It was looking for the one person who could carry truth without twisting it. Arjuna listened, and for the first time since he entered the mountain, he understood that his own doubt was part of the test. Then Victor laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut the silence. He stepped down one broken stair at a time, his torn black cape hanging behind him, the silver marks on his chest catching the silver light from the bow. He was not a madman, and he was not mindlessly cruel. He was a man who had once been powerless, mocked, and left behind, and now he had built his whole life around never being helpless again. That fear had hardened into pride, and that pride had turned into hunger. He believed that if he could claim the sealed power, no one would ever command him, abandon him, or shame him again. He pointed at the seal and told Arjuna that mercy was a lie told by the strong to keep the weak obedient. If the mountain had hidden power, then power was meant to be taken. As he spoke, the shadow host tightened their circle, and the temple floor gave another deep shudder. Maya looked toward Arjuna, her worried eyes wide but steady, and she finally spoke with the courage that had been building inside her since the first clash. She said Victor had lied to all of them before, using fear to turn people against each other, and she had seen him send guards into danger just to test how much control he still had. Ben nodded once, gripping his cracked shield, and he added that Victor had never been interested in saving the temple. He only wanted whatever it could give him. The words landed hard, and even Victor's cold face twitched for a moment because the truth had reached him before any blade could. The chain around the hidden object began to lift in thin, glowing strands, and the chamber filled with a low humming sound that seemed to come from the mountain bones themselves. Arjuna raised the astral bow, and its silver light stretched out like a living path toward the pedestal. The weapon did not feel heavy in his hands anymore. It felt awake, and it felt honest. A pulse of blue light moved from the bow into his arms, then into his chest, and his doubt burned away just enough for him to breathe clearly. He understood that the bow was not choosing the strongest person in the room. It was choosing the one who would not turn away from what the truth demanded. Victor saw that change and moved at once. He lunged toward the pedestal, not with wild rage, but with the cold speed of a man who had planned for this moment long before anyone else knew it was coming. The shadow host surged with him, their broken weapons slashing the air as they rushed the center of the chamber. Arjuna met them head-on. He fired one bright arc of silver light that struck the stone beside the first shadow soldier and blasted a wall of dust into the air. The blast did not destroy the creature, but it drove it back and shattered its line, giving Maya and Ben room to move. Ben charged in with his shield up, forcing two shadow soldiers to stagger. Maya grabbed a fallen chain and swung it across another creature's weapon, buying Arjuna the breath he needed. Krishna lifted one hand, and a soft blue glow spread across the floor, slowing the black smoke bodies just long enough to keep them from surrounding the group. The fight was fierce, but it stayed clean and sharp, with each move made to protect, not destroy. Victor reached the edge of the pedestal anyway. He lifted one armored hand, and the silver marks on his chest flashed with a cold, stolen light. For a brief moment, the chamber seemed to answer him, and Arjuna felt a hard jolt of alarm. This was the twist he had not seen coming. Victor had not just come for the seal. He had once stood in this temple before, years ago, and he had been touched by the same hidden power. The temple had not rejected him because he was weak. It had rejected him because he had tried to force the bond open before he understood it. That failure had become the wound that shaped his whole life. He had returned now not only for control, but to prove that the temple had been wrong about him. The truth made Victor's face tighten with pain for just one instant, and that instant was enough for Krishna to speak again. Krishna told Arjuna that fear had made Victor cruel, but fear could still be answered with choice. A seal was not a cage, it was a promise. It protected the sacred bond until the right heart arrived. Arjuna looked from Victor to the chain and understood that the hidden object was not a treasure waiting to be stolen. It was a test of character, and the temple had been waiting for someone who would protect it instead of possess it. Arjuna stepped closer to the pedestal, even as the chamber shook harder and the shadows pressed in from both sides. Victor shouted for him to stop because he could already feel the seal slipping beyond his reach. The dark chain-like light split into thin strands that floated upward around the pedestal, and beneath them the shape of the hidden object began to show, though no one could yet see its full form. The astral bow shone brighter, and the silver carvings along its curve glowed like stars just before dawn. Arjuna lowered one knee to the stone, not in surrender but in respect. He did the one thing Victor never could. He admitted he was unsure, and he still chose to act with honor. That choice sent a warm pulse through the chamber, and the shadow soldiers froze for one stunned beat. Krishna smiled faintly because he could feel the temple's answer. Maya and Ben looked on with renewed hope because they saw that Arjuna was not trying to win power. He was trying to earn trust. Then the black chain of light opened like a blooming ring, and a burst of white-blue radiance spilled across the floor. Everyone covered their eyes for a moment, and when the light settled, the stairway below the pedestal was no longer empty. A hidden passage had opened, descending deeper into the mountain than anyone had guessed. From below came one slow breath of cold air, and with it, a voice that was not quite human and not quite a whisper, calling Arjuna by name. Victor took one step back, his hard face finally losing its calm. He had not expected the temple to wake fully. He had expected a prize. Instead, he had found a door. Arjuna rose slowly, the astral bow glowing in his hands, and he stared into the dark passage with steady brown eyes. Whatever waited below was now awake, and it knew he had arrived. The chamber settled for one fragile moment, but no one mistook that stillness for peace. Arjuna was about to go deeper. Victor was not finished, and the true purpose of the temple was only beginning to reveal itself. The mountain temple was silent again, but it was not calm. Dust drifted through the broken hall, and cold silver light moved across cracked stone like water over a grave. Arjuna stood at the edge of the open passage, his dark hair falling around his tense face, the astral bow glowing softly in his hands. He was a strong man, built for battle, and yet his focused brown eyes showed a deeper thing now, something between courage and doubt. He had entered this ruined place hoping for a hidden reward, but the temple had answered with a warning instead. Behind him, Maya, a woman with dark brown hair and worried eyes, tightened the torn white robe around her shoulders. She wanted to understand the temple's secret and keep Arjuna from rushing into disaster. Beside her, Ben, a broad man with short blonde hair and a tired but loyal face, lifted his cracked shield and watched the dark doorway with steady concern. They all knew the same truth now. If the wrong power was released below, the whole mountain temple could become a trap that no one escaped. Victor stood across the chamber with hard eyes and a severe face, his black hair damp with dust and sweat, his dark layered armor catching the thin light in sharp edges. He did not look afraid. He looked insulted. Victor was a man driven by fear, pride, and the need to control everything around him, because deep down he believed that only power could keep him safe. The silver marks on his chest flashed when he moved, and his torn black cape dragged behind him as he took one slow step forward. Around him, the shadow host had not vanished. The armored humanoid creatures still stood in twisted rows, their black smoke bodies curling at the edges, their red eyes burning like coals, their broken spear-like weapons held in stiff hands. They were not free soldiers, they were bound tools, and Victor wanted to master them the same way he wanted to master everything else. He had come for the temple's prize, but now he understood that the prize was deeper, older, and far more useful than gold or stone. He wanted whatever power slept below, because he believed it could give him control over the battlefield, over the temple, and over every person who stood against him. Arjuna did not answer him at first. He only looked down into the passage, where a stairway cut sharply into the mountain and vanished into blackness. The air rising from below was colder than the chamber above, and it carried a strange pressure that made the skin feel tight. The astral bow pulsed once in his hands, and the silver light along its curved frame brightened as if it recognized the path. That was the first clue that something ancient was waiting below, something that did not sleep like a human but watched like a guard. Then a voice came softly from the side, and everyone turned. Krishna stepped out from the shadow of a shattered pillar, calm as still water, his black hair neat, his face peaceful, and his blue and gold robes glowing with a gentle aura. He did not move like a soldier. He moved like a teacher who already knew the lesson and only waited for others to hear it. Krishna had been quiet for most of the struggle, but he mattered more than anyone there understood, because he knew what the temple was made to protect. He had not come to claim the secret below, he had come to stop the wrong hands from touching it. The door was only the first lock, Krishna said, his voice even and clear. The temple woke because the seal was disturbed. If it opens fully, it will test the heart of anyone who enters. Victor gave a cold laugh, though his eyes narrowed. He hated being spoken to as if he did not understand. He stepped forward again and raised one gloved hand, and at once the shadow host shifted around him with a harsh scraping sound. Their broken spears angled toward Arjuna and the others. Victor wanted the others frightened, because fear made people easier to push. He also wanted the truth below, because somewhere in his mind he had decided that whatever was hidden there would justify every cruel choice he had ever made. He did not think of balance, he did not think of sacrifice. He thought only of winning before anyone else could take the prize from him. Maya's worried eyes moved from Victor to Krishna and back again. She had spent the earlier part of the journey helping the wounded, reading old carvings, and trying to make sense of the temple's strange warnings. She had found enough broken symbols to understand one thing clearly. The temple was not a treasure vault. It was a prison built by careful hands long ago. That realization had changed her fear into resolve. "This place was sealed for a reason," she said, her voice shaking only a little. "If the bottom chamber is a prison, then we cannot let Victor force it open." Ben nodded beside her. He was tired and his shield was cracked, but he was loyal in the simple way of someone who had already chosen the people he would stand beside. He did not care for glory. He cared about keeping the others alive long enough to understand what they had found. Arjuna finally lowered his chin and made his choice. He had come to this mountain wanting proof that he was strong enough to carry the astral bow and worthy enough to stand apart from fear. Now he saw that strength was not only about striking first. Sometimes it meant going downward when every instinct screamed to stay back. He turned to Maya and Ben, and his voice was firm, even if his heart was not completely steady. "Stay here if the stairs collapse," he said. "If anything comes up, hold this room." Then he looked at Krishna, and for a moment the two men shared a quiet understanding, because one of them carried faith and the other was just beginning to learn it. Krishna gave a small nod as if to say that Arjuna did not need to be fearless. He only needed to keep going with an honest heart. Victor saw that trust and hated it. He wanted Arjuna to look uncertain, to break, to hand over the bow, to prove that strength belonged to the cruel. Instead, he saw the opposite. He saw a man growing steadier in the middle of danger, and that made Victor furious in a way he could not hide. He snapped his fingers, and the shadow host surged forward at once. the chamber exploded into motion. Broken spear tips clashed against Ben's shield, and Ben pushed back with all his weight, boots grinding across the floor. Maya grabbed a fallen metal rod and swung it at the nearest smoke soldier, not to destroy it, but to force it away from the stairway. Arjuna drew the astral bow taut, and a line of blue light formed between his hands. He fired once, and the arrow of light struck the floor in front of the leading shadow creature, forcing it to stumble back through a burst of silver sparks. The creatures did not scream because they were not truly alive in the human way, but their movements jittered as if the command behind them had been shaken. That was when the temple changed again. A deep hum rolled upward from the stairwell, and the carvings in the floor began to glow with dim tar light. The stone under Arjuna's boots vibrated once, then settled. Somewhere below, something had heard the clash and responded. Krishna's eyes turned toward the passage, and his calm face grew more serious. "The lower chamber is waking," he said. "Now the real test begins." Victor froze for a fraction of a second, and that tiny pause showed the first crack in his confidence. He had expected a chamber full of objects he could seize. He had not expected the place itself to resist him. The shadow host hesitated too, as if a stronger will had pushed back against the command that drove them. Arjuna noticed it at once. The temple was not only a place. It was a guardian, and it was deciding who deserved to go deeper. Then the floor shifted under a section of broken stone near the stair. A hidden panel slid aside with a heavy grinding sound, revealing a narrow drop that had not been visible before. Cold air rushed out from below, carrying the smell of dust, old stone, and something sharp and strange, like burned iron. At the bottom of the dark stair, far below the room above, a pedestal came into view. It was old, cracked, and sacred in a way that made the skin prickle. Faint glowing carvings ringed its base, and on top of it rested a shape wrapped in black chain-like light, sealed so tightly that no one could tell what it held. Everyone felt it at once. This was the true heart of the temple. This was what the hidden door had protected. And this was what Victor had wanted all along without fully understanding what it was. Maya stepped to the stair edge, her face pale now because she understood the danger better than ever. The temple had not woken to hand over a prize. It had woken to choose. Ben raised his shield higher, and even he looked unsettled by the sight below. Victor's hard face changed, not into fear, but into greed sharpened by impatience. He could see power waiting in the dark, and that made him reckless. "It is mine," he said under his breath, as if saying it made it true. But Krishna's voice cut through the chamber before he could move. "No," he said, gentle but certain. "It is sealed because it must not answer to pride." Arjuna felt the astral bow thrum again, stronger this time, as if it were warning him about the seal. He took one step toward the stair, then another, and each step carried more weight than the last. He was not the same man who had entered the temple above. He was still afraid, but he was no longer ruled by that fear. He had learned that the power below was not a reward, and that his own worth would not be proven by taking it. That realization did not make the path easy. It made it honest. Behind him, Ben held the line against the last of the shadow soldiers. Maya watched the stair with wide, alert eyes. Victor tightened his fists and prepared to force the issue. And below them all, the black chain of light around the sealed object gave one slow pulse, as if something inside had noticed Arjuna at last and was waiting to see whether he would come closer. Then, from the darkness beneath the pedestal, a low voice answered without words, and every person in the chamber felt it in their bones. The temple had one more secret left, and it was now awake. The chamber stayed silent for one long breath, and that silence felt heavy enough to press on every shoulder. Cold air moved across the broken stone floor, and the silver light above the stair cut long lines across the dust. Arjuna stood near the center of it all, his dark hair tied back, his strong frame still, and his brown eyes fixed on the pedestal below. He wore his fitted warrior tunic, layered armor plates, red sash, bracers, and battle cloak, and even now he looked torn between courage and doubt. Beside him, Krishna stood calm and steady, a man with black hair, peaceful eyes, and simple blue and gold robes that caught the light like a soft flame. He never looked rushed, yet everyone felt his attention sharpen as the hidden voice stirred beneath the pedestal. Maya stood one step higher on the stair, her dark brown hair falling in a loose, dusty mess around her worried face, and her torn white robe showed how long she had already fought to reach this place. Ben, a broad man with short blonde hair, a battered guard uniform, and a cracked shield on one arm, stayed close behind her with tired loyalty in his eyes. Victor, with black hair, hard eyes, a severe face, dark armor, and a torn black cape, watched the seal like a man who believed the world owed him victory. He wanted control, and he wanted it now because he feared anything he could not command. The problem was no longer hidden. The temple had awakened, the seal had noticed Arjuna, and if the wrong hand touched the object below, the chamber could turn from guardian to weapon in a single instant. The low voice rose again from beneath the pedestal, and this time it did not feel like a sound. It felt like a pressure in the chest, a warning shared by everyone at once. The black chain of light around the sealed object gave another slow pulse, and the glow traveled through the dark links like a living heartbeat. Victor took one step forward, then another, and his fists tightened so hard that the metal of his gloves creaked. He had spent this entire journey believing power should belong to the strongest person in the room, and he was tired of waiting for signs, riddles, and warnings. "Enough," he said, and his voice echoed off the cracked pillars. "We take the seal now before that thing below us wakes fully." Maya turned toward him at once, alarm flashing in her worried eyes. She knew Victor was not only greedy but also scared, and she understood that fear had made him dangerous. "If we force it, we may break the temple's protection," she said, her voice thin but clear. Ben shifted beside her, raising his cracked shield a little higher, ready to stand between Victor and the stair if needed. Krishna lifted one hand, calm as ever, and his soft glow spread a little wider around his robes. "This place is testing us," he said quietly. "It is not asking who can grab the most. It is asking who can carry the truth." Arjuna heard those words, and they touched the part of him that still doubted himself. He had come this far with strength, but strength alone had not solved anything yet. He looked down at the black chain of light, and for the first time he did not see only power. He saw a warning, he saw a burden, he saw a promise that had been locked away for a reason. Then the temple answered their tension with motion. A sharp crack ran across the floor near the pedestal, and the glowing tar carvings below it lit up in a wide circle. The dark symbols spread outward like roots waking under stone, and the whole chamber trembled. From the side passage behind the shattered pillar line, the shadow host began to emerge, one armored figure after another, their black smoke bodies dragging jagged metal plates and broken spear-like weapons through the drifting dust. Their red eyes burned in the dark, and their stiff movements made them look less alive and more like soldiers pulled by a hidden string. They had been waiting for the seal to weaken, and now they moved to stop anyone who might claim it first. Ben gritted his teeth and stepped into a guard stance, his broad body square and steady despite his exhaustion. "I can hold the front," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Maya moved beside him, her hands shaking once before she made them still. She was not a trained warrior like Arjuna, but she had lived inside this temple long enough to know its signs, and she knew that fear had to be met with action. "They are not just attacking us," she said fast. "They are protecting the seal from being taken the wrong way." Victor gave a cold laugh, but there was strain in it now, because even he could see the number of shadow soldiers climbing out of the dark. He did not care about protection, he cared about proving that he could seize the prize before anyone else understood it. Arjuna drew himself taller, and the red sash at his waist shifted as he stepped between Victor and the stair. He did not fully trust the warning in the chamber, but he trusted the cost of reckless force even less. "No one touches that seal yet," he said, and his voice came out firmer than he expected. That was the first change in him, small but real. He had stopped asking whether he was worthy enough and started asking what was right. Krishna's gaze moved from the shadow host to Arjuna, and in that calm look was a quiet instruction. He had guided Arjuna for a long time, not by command, but by helping him see the shape of his own heart. Now he knew the young warrior was close to understanding something important. The seal below was not a treasure made for greed. It was a lock made to keep a dangerous force contained until the right person could face it without being ruled by fear. That truth had been hidden because earlier guardians had seen what happened when pride touched sacred power. Victor had never heard the full story, or perhaps he had refused to hear it, but the temple had seen enough of his anger to treat him like a threat. As the first shadow soldier lunged forward, Arjuna moved at once. He did not charge with blind fury. He stepped, turned, and struck with control, using the edge of his blade and the force of his armor to drive the creature back without wasting motion. Ben slammed his shield into another shadow soldier, knocking it off balance and forcing it away from Maya. The chamber filled with clashes of metal, flashes of dim red light, and bursts of black smoke where broken spear shafts met stone. Victor joined the struggle only when it became impossible to ignore, and even then he fought as if each move was meant to show superiority rather than protect anyone else. That made him strong, but not steady. The shadow host pressed in from three sides, and the broken temple chamber began to feel smaller with every second. Krishna did not fight like the others. He raised both hands, and his blue and gold robe sleeves drifted with a light wind that did not belong to the room. His glow spread across the floor carvings, and the glowing tar lines shifted in answer. The temple was listening to him, or perhaps it was listening through him. "Arjuna," Krishna said softly, "the seal will not open for force. It will answer truth." Those words struck Arjuna harder than any blade. He looked again at the black chain of light, and a strange idea formed in his mind. The chamber was not asking for power at all. It was asking for trust. So Arjuna took one step toward the pedestal, ignoring Victor's sharp protest behind him. The shadows around the room seemed to lean in, and the sealed object pulsed again as if it recognized his choice. Maya held her breath. Ben tightened his grip. Victor's face hardened with rising anger because he saw the moment slipping beyond his control. Arjuna stopped at the edge of the glowing circle, lowered his weapon, and placed his free hand over his chest. He did not speak a boast. He did not promise victory. He simply admitted the truth, and that was harder. He said that he had doubted himself, that he had feared failing everyone, and that he still did not know the full path ahead. The chamber went still. Even the shadow host seemed to pause. Then the black chain of light loosened by a single link, and the pulse inside the seal became brighter, slower, and warmer. A second voice rose from beneath the pedestal, and this time it was clearer. It was not a monster. It was not a curse in the usual sense. It was a guardian bound to a sacred duty, and it had been waiting for a heart that would not turn power into selfish gain. Victor stared at the seal in disbelief, and the truth finally reached him too late to make him wise. The temple had never been testing strength alone. It had been testing the one thing Victor feared most, and the one thing Arjuna was only now learning to hold. Before anyone could react further, the stone around the pedestal began to split with a deep groan, and a thin line of light opened beneath the black chain. Everyone in the chamber froze as the hidden object stirred at last, and from the darkness below, something ancient started to rise. For one brief moment, Arjuna forgot the noise, the smoke, and Victor's anger. He felt only the pull of that hidden presence and the heavy cost of what might happen next. Krishna turned his head slightly, his peaceful face still calm, but now marked with quiet concern, because he understood that the chamber had moved beyond warning and into revelation. Maya edged closer to Ben, who planted his boots and prepared to shield her if the floor gave way again. Victor kept his eyes fixed on the opening crack, and his pride fought with a fear he would never admit out loud. The shadow host drew back half a step, as if even they knew the seal had changed. Arjuna stood at the front of them all, no longer just the strongest fighter in the room, but the one willing to listen when the world spoke in a low voice from the dark. That was why the seal had answered him. That was why the temple had opened at last. And as the glowing line under the pedestal widened, the next secret began to surface, leaving everyone staring into the unknown, with only a few breaths left before the chamber would decide their fate. The ruined mountain temple stayed silent for one long breath, and that silence felt heavy enough to crush the stone floor. Cold wind moved through the broken pillars of the upper battlefield temple, carrying dust, ash, and the faint smell of old magic. Around Arjuna, the others stood in a tight circle, each one watching the glowing line under the pedestal widen a little more. The chamber had already chosen to answer his presence, and that made everyone afraid, because ancient places never opened for nothing. Arjuna was a man with dark hair, a strong build, and focused brown eyes, wearing a fitted warrior tunic, layered armor plates, a red sash, bracers, and a flowing battle cloak. He had come here wanting answers, but now he also wanted something harder, which was to protect the people beside him from whatever truth waited below. Krishna stood nearby with black hair, calm eyes, and a peaceful face, wearing simple flowing robes in blue and gold tones with a soft glowing aura around him. He did not look shaken, but his stillness made the fear around him easier to carry. Maya, a woman with dark brown hair, worried eyes, and a determined face, kept her torn white temple robe close around her shoulders, while Ben, a man with short blonde hair, a broad build, and a tired but loyal expression, held his cracked shield with both hands. Behind them, the shadow host waited at the edge of the chamber, a mass of armored humanoid creatures with black smoke bodies, jagged metal plates, glowing red eyes, and broken spear-like weapons. They had forced their way through the temple halls before, and they were here now because someone had sent them to claim whatever was hidden beneath the seal. That someone was Victor, a man with black hair, hard eyes, and a severe face, wearing dark layered armor with a high collar, a torn black cape, and silver marks on his chest. Victor did not want the seal because he loved mystery. He wanted it because he feared being weak, and he believed that if he held the temple's power first, then no one else could use it against him. That fear had driven him across the mountain, and it had already made him dangerous. The glowing line under the pedestal suddenly spread into a full ring, and the sealed object above it trembled once, then rose a finger's width into the air. Black chain of light, the strange magical binding around it, tightened and loosened in slow waves, as if the temple itself was testing the room one last time. Then a low sound rolled through the floor, and the stone behind the pedestal split open just enough to reveal a stairway leading deeper down. No one moved at first, because every person in the chamber understood the same simple truth. If the stair opened, then the real trial had not begun yet, and if the seal failed, the mountain would be lost to whatever slept below. Krishna stepped closer to Arjuna, his voice soft but clear, and he told him that the temple was not asking for the strongest hand. It was asking for the cleanest heart. Arjuna had heard these kinds of words before and never fully trusted them, because strength had always been the thing that kept him alive. But now he remembered the moment the seal had answered him, and he understood that the chamber had not reacted to his power alone. It had reacted when he chose to listen instead of force. That small change mattered more than any swing of a blade. Maya looked down the new stairway and said that the carvings on the walls were not meant as decoration. They were warnings. The old temple keepers had built this place to hide a sacred object from greedy rulers, but they had also built it to judge anyone who came after. Ben swallowed hard and said he hated temples that asked questions because the answers usually hurt. His joke was weak, but it helped hold the fear in place for one more moment. Then the shadow host surged forward, and the chamber became a storm of moving smoke and metal. Their red eyes flashed in the silver light as they raised broken spear-like weapons and rushed toward the opening stair. Ben met the first wave with his cracked shield, bracing his broad shoulders and forcing the front line back step by step. His guard uniform was battered, his boots were worn, and he was tired, but he never turned away when someone stood behind him. Maya moved beside him, pulling loose stone dust into her hands and throwing it into the eyes of a charging shadow-forged being, giving Arjuna a clear path toward the pedestal. Arjuna drew himself up and struck with sharp control, using his strength with restraint instead of rage. Each clash sent dark fragments scattering across the floor, and each move showed that he was no longer fighting only to win. He was fighting to keep the chamber from turning into a trap for everyone in it. Above the noise, Victor finally stepped into view at the far side of the room. He had black hair plastered to his forehead, and his severe face looked even harder under the silver marks on his chest. He did not rush like a brute. He walked with cold control because he believed fear made people predictable. He told Arjuna that the seal should belong to the one who could use it best, and he said that hesitation was just another word for weakness. But Arjuna saw the truth in his eyes. Victor wanted the power because he could not bear the idea that the world might be guided by someone he could not command. That was why he had ordered the shadow host forward in the first place. He thought the temple would break under pressure, and if the temple broke, he would take what remained. Krishna raised one hand, and his quiet presence pushed through the chaos like a clear bell in a dark room. He did not shout, and he did not fight for pride. He simply pointed at the chain around the sealed object and told Arjuna that the temple was still waiting for a choice, not a victory. Those words struck deeper than any blade could have done. Arjuna looked at the black chain of light and understood all at once that the binding was not just a lock, it was a promise. The temple keepers had chained the object not because they feared the object itself, but because they feared what would happen if a selfish person claimed it without first understanding its weight. That was the twist hidden inside the chamber, and it changed everything. The temple had not opened to reward force. It had opened to measure trust. Arjuna took one step down toward the hidden stair, then stopped because he felt the floor pulse again beneath his boots. The temple was still awake, still watching, and now it seemed to be waiting to see whether he would bring the others with him or leave them behind. Maya saw the doubt on his face and said she would follow if he went. Ben tightened his grip on the shield and said he would not let the shadow host through, even if his arm went numb. Krishna gave Arjuna a gentle nod, and that was enough to steady him. So Arjuna turned back toward Victor and said that power without trust was only another prison. Victor's face hardened, and for the first time, he looked less certain than angry. The shadow host began to gather again behind him, but the chamber answered with a deeper glow from below, as if the mountain itself had begun to wake. Arjuna stepped to the edge of the stair, and the air rising from the dark below was colder than before, carrying a faint light that none of them could yet understand. Whatever waited under the temple was now closer than ever, and the next secret was about to rise. The cold air rising from the stair below moved like a warning breath through the broken chamber, and every cracked stone around it seemed to listen. Dust drifted through the silver light, and the shattered pillars cast long shadows across the floor. Arjuna stood at the edge of the opening with his battle cloak hanging still behind him, his dark hair damp with sweat, his brown eyes fixed on the glow below. He was strong but not careless, and he knew this temple was not just a ruin now. It was a test. Behind him, Krishna stood in calm blue and gold robes, his black hair neat, his peaceful face steady even in the growing danger. Krishna wanted balance, and he wanted Arjuna to see that force without wisdom would only break everything it touched. Maya remained near the side wall, her dark brown hair tied back and her white robe torn from the fight, yet her worried eyes still searched the dark stair with fierce determination. Ben stood beside her, his short blonde hair dusty, his cracked shield raised, his tired face still loyal even when his arms shook. He wanted to keep everyone alive long enough to learn what the temple was hiding. And below them, in the dark, something ancient was waking. That was the heart of the danger. If Victor reached it first, he could use whatever lay under the temple to tighten his grip on the shadow host and spread his control beyond the mountain. If Arjuna and his allies failed, the whole temple could become a gate for fear itself. Victor stepped forward through the gathered shadows, and for the first time his hard face did not look fully certain. His black hair fell across his severe brow, and the silver marks on his chest caught the deep light from below. He still stood straight in his dark armor and torn black cape, but his cold pride was being tested now. He had spent too long building strength from fear, and he could not bear the idea that something greater than him was hidden in this mountain. That was why he had come. He did not want only power. He wanted proof that his way was the only way. The shadow host formed behind him in a rough line, their black smoke bodies twisting around jagged metal plates, their red eyes shining like embers in a furnace. Their broken spear weapons tapped against the stone in stiff, unnatural movements, as if they were waiting for a single command. Victor raised one hand, and the creatures answered at once, gathering tighter as if his will were pulling chains through the dark. He looked at Arjuna and spoke with a voice that was low, sharp, and full of pressure. He said the temple had hidden this power too long, and that only someone strong enough to control it deserved to claim it. Krishna answered before Arjuna could move, saying that power kept by fear never stayed pure, and that any force born in darkness would turn against the one who abused it. Victor's jaw tightened because he knew Krishna was speaking to the truth he had avoided for years. Then the glow below deepened again, and the stone stair answered with a soft tremor. A single shadow-forged being climbed into view from the lower darkness, its black smoke body dragging through the cold air as its jagged armor scraped the stone. Its red eyes burned brighter than the others, and its broken spear looked almost fused to its hand. It moved in a stiff, unnatural way, like a soldier made from a bad memory instead of flesh. But this one did not stop at the stair. It paused, tilted its head, and then turned toward Victor instead of Arjuna. The chamber went still. Even the shadow host behind Victor seemed to hesitate. Victor's face changed, and anger flashed through the control he had held so tightly. He had expected obedient creatures, not a force that could choose for itself. Maya saw it first, and she gasped as she realized the truth. The shadows were not just soldiers. They were bound by the temple itself, and Victor had only been borrowing their strength. Krishna's eyes lowered for a moment, and he looked almost sad because now the hidden rule was becoming clear. The temple did not belong to Victor, and it never had. It had been made to guard something sacred from anyone who wanted to use it for selfish reasons. That was why the light below was waking. It was not opening for Victor. It was judging him. Arjuna felt the change in the air and stepped down one stair then another, keeping his weight light and his body ready. He was not fearless, but he had learned something in the fights before this one. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to move anyway when people you cared about were behind you. He looked back at Maya and Ben, then at Krishna, and he understood that they were all waiting for him to decide what kind of leader he would be. He lifted his chin and told Victor that if the temple had a truth hidden inside it, then he would face it, not steal it. Victor laughed, but the sound was thin now because even he could hear the wrongness in the chamber. He ordered the shadow host forward, and the armored figures surged with stiff, harsh steps toward Arjuna and the stair. Ben moved first, smashing the butt of his cracked shield into the nearest one and forcing it back with a heavy shove. Maya pulled a loose, glowing fragment from the floor, and the little protective light in her hand pushed another shadow soldier away from the stair. Krishna raised a hand, and soft blue-gold light spread across the broken floor, slowing the shadows long enough for Arjuna to descend a few more steps. The battle did not explode all at once. It tightened. It became a struggle for every step, every breath, every inch of ground. At the same time, the deeper chamber began to show itself. The stair opened into a round stone hollow beneath the temple, and in its center stood the deep chamber pedestal, cracked and worn, with faint glowing carvings circling its base. On top of it rested an object wrapped in the black chain of light, the dark linked lines shining with a dim inner glow as if they were holding back something alive. The air around the pedestal felt sacred, but also dangerous, like a promise made long ago and never broken. Arjuna reached the bottom first, and for one instant he simply stared. He could feel the power in the chamber pressing against his skin, not as heat, but as judgment. Victor pushed toward the stair behind him, forcing the shadow host to crowd the opening, and his voice sharpened with hunger. He said the chain was only a lock and that he would break it, claim what was sealed, and finally end the fear that had ruled him for so long. That was his true motive, clear at last. He did not just want to defeat others. He wanted to erase the part of himself that had always felt small, weak, and afraid. He believed control would make him whole. But the temple had hidden this object because it knew control was the wrong answer. Krishna moved beside Arjuna and quietly explained that some sacred things were never meant to be forced open. They waited for the one person who could understand them instead. And then, as the light rose from the seal, the chain did something none of them expected. It loosened by one link, just enough to reveal a soft, star-like glow inside, and a voice, faint and ancient, seemed to reach upward from the chamber floor. It did not speak to Victor, it spoke to Arjuna. The voice said the trial had not ended and the true guardian had finally arrived. Arjuna's eyes widened because he understood that the temple was not asking for strength alone. It was asking for trust. Victor stopped at the edge of the stair, and even his shadow host seemed uncertain now, as if the whole army had felt the shift in the air. He stared at Arjuna, then at Krishna, then at the glowing seal, and for one small moment his pride looked more like fear than anger. The chamber had chosen a side and Victor was not on it. Maya moved closer to Arjuna, her face pale but steady, and Ben came to her side, breathing hard while keeping his cracked shield raised. They were tired, but they were together, and that mattered more than force in that moment. Arjuna took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the temple, the others beside him, and the unseen test waiting in the chain of light. He knew this was not the end of the danger because the pedestal was still sealed and Victor was still there, desperate and cornered. But he also knew something had changed inside him. He was no longer only fighting to survive. He was fighting to protect a truth he had finally begun to understand. Krishna watched him with quiet approval because Arjuna had begun to choose with his heart, not just his hands. The seal gave one more soft pulse, and the chamber below the mountain answered with a deeper vibration, as if another door had just opened somewhere far beneath them. Victor's hand twitched, and the shadow host tightened again, ready to strike. Above them, the broken temple groaned around its own secret. Below them, the dark light waited. And in the center of it all, Arjuna stepped forward one careful pace, ready to face whatever the next secret would reveal. The broken temple above the mountain stayed dark and cold, while silver light slid across the cracked floor like a thin blade. Dust drifted through the air in slow lines, and every shattered pillar looked ready to fall. The chamber felt ancient and trapped, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Arjuna stood in the center of that stillness, with his dark hair tied back, his brown eyes fixed ahead, and his red sash moving gently behind him. He was strong, trained, and brave, but he also carried doubt that never fully left him. Beside him stood Krishna, a man with black hair, calm eyes, and simple blue and gold robes that glowed softly in the gloom. Krishna wanted more than victory because he wanted Arjuna to understand the true meaning of power, and that mattered more than any weapon in the temple. Behind them, Maya, a woman with dark brown hair and worried eyes, held her torn white robe close as she watched the shadows. Ben, a man with short blonde hair and a broad, tired build, kept his cracked shield ready because he had promised to guard the others until the end. And across the chamber, Victor watched them with hard eyes and a severe face, his black hair falling over his dark armor, his torn cape hanging like a broken banner, and the silver marks on his chest glowing faintly. Victor wanted control because fear had shaped him for too long, and he believed that if he could seize the power sealed below the mountain, he could never be helpless again. That was the heart of the conflict now. The seal had awakened, the hidden chamber below had answered, and if Victor reached the power first, the temple would become a weapon instead of a guard. The black chain of light around the pedestal pulsed once, and the sound rolled upward through the stone like a deep warning. A narrow stairway opened beside the chamber floor, where the mountain's broken steps led down into a darker level. Arjuna stepped forward, and every shadow-forged being in the chamber turned at once, their black smoke bodies stiffening under jagged metal plates. Their glowing red eyes locked onto him, and their broken spear-like weapons scraped the stone as the shadow host tightened around the room. Victor raised one hand, and the creatures moved with unnatural unity, driven by his will and his pride. He had not brought them here just to fight. He had brought them because he believed the seal would crack when enough pressure was placed on it, and he intended to force the temple open before anyone else could claim what waited below. Maya saw the truth in his face and understood it first. She called out that Victor was not trying to destroy the seal, but to break its test. He wanted to make the sacred power submit to him because he could not stand the idea that anything in the world might judge him. Krishna answered her with a small nod, and his calm made the fear in the chamber feel smaller, though it did not disappear. He told Arjuna that the temple did not protect a treasure by accident. It had been built long ago by people who knew that great power could only be held by someone who could resist greed, rage, and the need to dominate. That was why the seal had reacted to Arjuna's heart. It was not asking for the strongest hand, it was asking for the most honest one. Arjuna heard the words, but he still felt the weight of his own fear. He had faced monsters before, but this was different because the chamber seemed to read everything inside him. If he failed, the seal might shatter, Victor might take the power, and the shadow host might flood the mountain and spread beyond it. The first clash came fast, and the broken temple filled with motion. Ben rushed left to block a pair of shadow-forged beings, his cracked shield ringing as their spear tips struck it in harsh, dry blows. He was tired, but he was loyal, and that loyalty kept him standing when his arms began to shake. Maya moved behind a fallen pillar and used her protective wraps to pull a loose stone beam into place, slowing another group of creatures that tried to rush the stairway. She was not the strongest fighter in the room, but she was smart, careful, and determined, and those traits made her just as important as any blade. Krishna lifted one hand, and his soft aura spread through the dust like quiet sunlight. It did not attack the shadows directly. Instead, it steadied Arjuna's mind, helping him see the battle without letting panic take over. Arjuna drew the astral bow, and the weapon answered with a bright silver glow that made the carvings on its surface shine like tiny stars. The bow had chosen him because it sensed alignment, and now it burned brighter as his breathing slowed and his doubt gave way to focus. He pulled back one luminous arrow, aimed not at flesh, but at the smoke inside the nearest shadow-forged being, and released. The arrow struck with a burst of blue light, and the creature stumbled backward, its dark shape breaking apart for a moment before forcing itself together again. Victor saw that and smiled without warmth. He knew the bow was dangerous, but he also knew Arjuna was still learning to trust himself. So Victor raised the pressure again, sending more of the shadow host toward the stairs, forcing the others to split their attention while he moved toward the pedestal below. He wanted the sacred object hidden under the black chain of light because he believed it would give him the one thing he had never allowed himself to need: trust in anything beyond his own control. Arjuna saw Victor reach the lower stair, and for one hard moment, the whole fight narrowed into a single choice. He could keep striking the shadow host, or he could follow Victor and risk everything below. Krishna stepped close and told him the truth in a quiet voice. The temple was not only a prison for power, it was also a mirror. It would open fully only when someone chose others above fear. That was the missing piece, and Arjuna felt it land in his chest like a clear bell. He realized the seal had never been testing force. It had been testing sacrifice. If he chased Victor only out of anger, the chamber would fail him. If he kept fighting only for pride, he would become like the man he was trying to stop, so he made a different choice. He turned to Ben and Maya and asked them to hold the chamber for one more minute, not because he ordered them, but because he trusted them. Ben answered with a tired grin and planted his shield hard against the floor. Maya nodded once, then dragged a broken chain across a narrow gap to slow the shadows. Krishna remained still, his calm eyes following Arjuna as he moved toward the stair. That small act changed everything, because Arjuna was no longer trying to prove himself alone. He was fighting with others instead of above them. As he reached the dark stair, the astral bow shone so brightly that the wall carvings woke around him, and the hidden path below became visible in pulsing lines of silver and tar black. Victor stood halfway down the steps, his hand reaching toward the deep chamber pedestal. The black chain of light around the sealed object tightened, then gave one long pulse, as if recognizing two different hearts approaching it. Victor glanced back, and for the first time, his face showed more than anger. It showed fear. He had come this far because he believed control would save him, but now he could see that the temple was not answering to control at all. It was answering to truth. That made him dangerous, because a man who fears the wrong thing can do anything to win. Arjuna took one more step down, the chamber humming around him, while the shadow host pressed harder behind him and the sealed power below began to stir again, waiting to see who would reach it first. The broken mountain temple shook under cold silver light, and dust drifted through the wide chamber like pale smoke. Far below, the deep stair waited beside a worn stone pedestal, where an old seal still held a sacred power inside black chain of light. Everyone could feel it now. If the seal broke in the wrong hands, the temple would turn into a weapon, and the shadow host would spread that power into the world. Arjuna stood at the edge of the stair, his dark hair wet with sweat, his strong build tense, and his brown eyes locked on the darkness below. He was brave, but doubt still cut at him, because he knew force alone had brought them this far, and force alone would not finish it. Behind him, Maya, a woman with dark brown hair and worried eyes, pulled herself up beside Ben, a broad man with short blonde hair and a battered shield. They had come to protect the temple, and they mattered because they would not let fear guide the final choice. Then Victor stepped forward from the shadow host, his black hair falling over a severe face, his hard eyes full of fear hidden inside pride. He had wanted control because he believed control would keep him safe, and now he finally saw the truth. The temple was not obeying power, it was answering honesty. That revelation broke his plan, and it made him more dangerous, because a frightened man will try almost anything to win. He ordered the shadow-forged beings forward, and the smoke soldiers rushed down the stairs in a stiff, awful wave. Arjuna reached for the astral bow, and the radiant weapon flared bright silver and blue. Krishna appeared in a calm glow above the broken floor, his black hair neat, his blue and gold robes steady, and his peaceful face filled with certainty. He told Arjuna that the seal would only open for a heart that wanted to protect, not possess. Hearing that, Arjuna finally understood why he had been chosen. He was not there to take power, he was there to guard it. He drew the astral bow with both hands, not to destroy the seal, but to calm it. The light spread across the chamber, touched the black chain of light, and slowed the shaking stone. Victor lunged for one last command, but the shadow host faltered as the temple rejected their fear. Maya and Ben held the line while Arjuna spoke one simple truth into the darkness, and the seal answered. The chains of shadow dissolved, the hidden power sank safe beneath the pedestal, and Victor was forced back as his army collapsed into smoke. The chamber fell silent at last. Arjuna stood breathing hard, no longer ruled by doubt, and Krishna watched with quiet pride. The temple had been saved, not by control, but by truth, and Arjuna walked away changed forever.